Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and I'm sure you are aware of the protests currently going on regarding the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, which are only some of the most recent in a very long history of the United States regarding the murders of Black people, especially related to police brutality, as in the cases of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I'm going to put links to a bunch of different resources in the description box. There are lots of ways that you can donate or sign petitions or support in some way the Black Lives Matter movement. And remember that if you are signing petitions on change.org, do not donate. That money actually goes to the website. It does not go to the cause you are supporting, so make sure you are donating directly to them through their GoFundMes or other funds that have been set up. I will also link some resources down below about how we as white people can better educate ourselves, because it really shouldn't have taken yet another string of murders of Black people to get people to mobilize like this. I hope that all of us can continue this momentum going forward, and not just when it's in the news and everybody is talking about it. And as another reminder to my fellow white people, do not ask your Black friends to explain racism to you, or to explain these protests to you, or even ask them like, hey, what books should I be reading? That is not their job. Please do not give them that added burden in addition to everything else that you're dealing with. There are so many resources out there, literally thousands of resources that are specifically dedicated to helping white people educate ourselves. I will link a couple down below, but honestly it just takes some Googling. So just remember not to do that. Don't put your Black friends or acquaintances or anybody through that. It is not their job to educate us. And especially if you are looking where to start to educate yourselves about anti-racism, there are again a ton of resources. I will link a couple of lists. So today I'm going to be spotlighting some fantastic books that are by Black authors. And this is a reminder that we should be reading and reviewing and promoting Black authors and Black artists all year round, not just during times of crisis or like February during Black History Month or something. This should be an ongoing thing. With that being said, I know a lot of people, one of the ways that they are looking to support Black Lives Matter and the Black community in general is through reading and, you know, supporting Black-owned bookstores and things like that. So with that in mind, I am going to talk about some fantastic books by Black authors today. These are some of my favorites. And I also want to mention that talking about books that are by Black authors and about Black characters, those shouldn't only come up in our recommendations when we were talking about the fact that they are Black, if that makes sense. They should also come up if you're talking about books in your favorite genre, or books that you recommend for a particular challenge or reason, or like basically they should be in the running for any kind of book recommendation you are doing. Because if you like to read good books, then it is very, very easy to read diversely, because no matter what genre or what kind of book you read, there are marginalized authors who are writing amazing examples of that genre, and we should be looking for them and reading them and promoting them. Because no matter what kind of book you like to read, I can guarantee you that there are Black and other marginalized authors who have written fantastic works of art. So here's what we're going to do. Like I said, I will be spotlighting some of my favorite books that are by Black authors and that have Black main characters. If you're new to my Spotlight series, I think my last official one that I made that was called this was on spotlighting Own Voices middle grade books. That is a series where I highlight some books that I love that are by authors from a marginalized and underrepresented group that I don't actually share. So the reason I call it a specific thing is because I want to make it clear that I cannot speak to the particular areas of representation that are in those books, but these are still fantastic books and I want to do my part to promote them. But I also want to make it clear that there's a huge component of these stories that I can't personally speak on. So I really encourage you to seek out Own Voices reviews. From the reviews that I have seen of these books, they are going to be ones that, as far as I know, the representation is considered to be well done by people from that group. But again, I can't personally speak to that. What I'm also going to do for this video is list all of the books that I talk about in the description box. So if you just want to go to that list and then go to Own Voices reviewers and see what they think, please totally feel free to do that. I am going to talk about some story elements of these books. Like I said, if you just want to grab that list and seek out Own Voices reviews instead, please feel free to do that. I also want to mention that I will list all of the content warnings that I can remember for these books in the description. Some of these I read longer ago than others, so I will do my best to remember all of them that I can. But if you are concerned about certain content warnings or trigger warnings, I would recommend looking those up separately as well. And then the last thing before I actually get into the book recommendations is I talked about this on Twitter a little bit, but I know not everyone is on Twitter. There are a ton of resources. Black creators have been promoting Black authors for a very long time, so we should be taking the time to seek out those videos and those blog posts and everything like that. So I just want to run over some examples that, again, there are many more, and again, I will link these down below. Olivia from Olivia's Catastrophe, she has actually 2 videos. One she did that is just like kind of a master list of books by Black authors with Black protagonists that she enjoys and really recommends, and across all kinds of genres, which I really love. And she also recently did one where she's recommending new releases to Black booktubers. So this kind of doubles as a shout out video for Black creators authors, in addition to promoting and getting hype going for some anticipated releases that are by Black authors. Kimberly Ann did a series that she kind of combined some of her favorite books by Black authors with some that are on her TBR and that she's excited to read. She even did kind of a gift-giving guide of books by Black authors. Pretty Brown Eye Reader, poetry lovers, you will love her channel. Every April for National Poetry Month, she does almost every day or every day during April, she does a short video where she performs a poem by a Black poet, and she includes a little bit of analysis or discussion at the end of that. And I just think that's fantastic. She covers a wide range of Black poets, so she definitely has some from the Harlem Renaissance that I think people are familiar with, like Langston Hughes, but she also covers a lot of more modern poets, or even ones that are not necessarily modern, but are ones that we just don't talk about as much. So highly recommend her channel and her work. Fatwa from Word Wonders, she just did a really wonderful kind of master list of books that she has loved that are by Black authors and some of her anticipated reads as well, in addition to just books that are on her TBR that are already out that are by Black authors and that she's really excited to read. Marinas from My Name is Marinas is a fantastic reviewer. I'm going to link just one example of one of her reviews down below. It is spoiler free. That video is on Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, which is also by a Black author and follows a Black main character. And Marinas described that as one of her favorite books of the year and one of the most surprising books of the year. So definitely check that out. That was actually the review that put that book on my radar because I had seen it advertised on like Google ads and Goodreads ads and everything, but after hearing Marinas talk about it, I definitely want to read that one. Then we also have Njeri from Onyx Pages. If you guys are into SFF, especially Afrofuturism or African futurism, you definitely need to be following Njeri. Her 2019 favorites list, I will link that one down below, and it covers just a huge span of age ranges and formats and genres and everything. There's a lot of short story collections in there, so if you're interested in that, and if I remember correctly, almost that entire list are books by Black authors, so definitely check that out. So that's just a starting point. There are many more Black creators out there, and recommendation videos and reviews that they have been making and promoting for a long time, so please check those out. And again, don't just go to your Black friends and ask them to tell you what to read. Please don't do that. So now into the books themselves. I do have a wide variety of genres here and age ranges, which I'm really excited about. And I also do have a few nonfiction picks. I didn't include any of the like really popular ones that people are talking about right now about anti-racism. But again, there are a lot of resources for those out there already. And these are in no particular order. And the first book I'm going to talk about is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is one I think a lot of people are familiar with, but just in case it has slipped past your radar, this is a nonfiction book. It is actually a memoir written by Trevor Noah about his life growing up in South Africa during apartheid. And like the title says, it was quite literally a crime to have a mixed race child born. So he writes about that growing up. He writes about his community. He writes about what it's like living under apartheid. And I think this is a book that is especially useful for people, especially white people who are not from South Africa, like who maybe know a very general history of South Africa and apartheid, but not specifics and not like personal examples. I think if you are from South Africa, there probably won't be anything new in this book for you, but for those of us who are not from there, I think this is a really important educational experience. And Trevor Noah is a very funny and clever and engaging writer. If you've seen his comedy, he's just a very enjoyable person to watch or to listen to talk, and that is also true when he is writing. So definitely recommend that one. Next, I have Mirage by Somaiya Daud. This was actually one of my biggest surprises the year it came out because I had seen this book in a few subscription boxes, but I hadn't really heard any reviews for it. And I really enjoyed this one. This is on Voices, as are all of the books on this list, and it is a Moroccan-inspired fantasy. And one of the things I think is so cool about this book is the way it blends sci-fi and fantasy. I think that if you are really comfortable in either one of those genres, but you're looking to dip your toes in, or I think if you don't really read SFF at all, but you're kind of wanting to try it, I think this could be a great book for that because the world building is not overwhelming. I don't think it would be too confusing or too hard to follow if you're not used to reading science fiction or fantasy, but it's still very interesting and very compelling and very richly developed, but not in a way that feels like it's overwhelming you with detail. Like if you don't like sci-fi and you're worried about like robots and like spaceships and all of that, don't worry about that. This book is not that kind of sci-fi. And also if you're not really a big fantasy person because you don't really want like magical creatures or like spells or wands, it's not really that kind of fantasy either. It's a really hard thing to describe and I love it. Amani as a main character is super interesting, especially her dynamic with the Princess Maram. It's very interesting to see them interact and start to get to know each other, and they have a very antagonistic relationship, but I really love the way that as the book goes on, you start to understand a little bit more about why Maram is the way that she is. Not to excuse her choices, but it's very interesting to get to know a little bit more about her background and how she grew up and how that may have affected the things that she does. While again, the author does not make any excuses for her behavior. A lot of this one, Amani actually ends up being chosen as a body double for the Princess Madam, and so that puts her like right in the middle of all of this politics and these machinations and things that she's not really used to navigating. And so seeing her start to get better at that and start to try and figure out like what she should do and how to protect herself and the people she cares about. It's a very, very compelling story. Again, very interesting antagonist angle. And the second book actually comes out very soon, and I'm very, very excited for that. Next, I have 2 nonfiction books by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Again, these are probably on the more well-known side, but just in case, those are Dear Ijeawele, A Feminist Manifesto and 15 Suggestions, and We Should All Be Feminists. Of the 2 of them, I think Dear Ijeawele is my favorite, but I do think both of these are solid, especially as kind of like basic intros to feminism. I think if you're very familiar with feminist thought, there won't be a lot of stuff that is new to you. But that being said, Adichie does definitely bring her own interpretations, her own background to this. She is Nigerian, so it's very interesting to see her compare her experiences from Nigeria with what she observes in the United States. I do want to say that I think it's We Should All Be Feminists that has a little bit of kind of like gender essentialist language. Like she says things like women are the ones that bear children and things like that. So just keep that in mind. That I think that one is a little bit older, and from what I've heard from her talks and things that she's giving now, I don't think she uses that like language or examples anymore, but do keep that in mind. But I would definitely recommend those, and like I said, especially for people who are just getting into feminism. Next, I have the Binti Trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. This is an African futurism series of novellas, and because they're so short, I don't really want to give too much of a plot synopsis for this one. But what happens is Binti is a member of the Himba tribe, and none of her tribe has ever been accepted into this very prestigious cross-galaxy university, and then Binti gets in, and she decides to go. So her family and the people from her community don't really understand why she wants this, but Binti knows that she wants this, and it's very important. And then while she's traveling there, there is something very terrible that happens on board the ship, and the rest of this novella is about Binti trying to navigate that. And I really love this series. I think one of the things I love most about it is the writing and the way that Nnedi Okorafor can make science feel beautiful and poetic, because like I'm not really a sciences person, like STEM is not really my area, so I think I have this tendency to associate space and science and all of that with being more cold and clinical, and the way that Nnedi Okorafor writes it, it's beautiful, and it's this kind of like transcendent experience, especially the way that Binti experiences that and experiences numbers, like the mathematical like problems that she works through and everything, like they're all just described in this really really beautiful way. Another thing I loved is Binti as a main character. I just really admire her so much. She's so strong and brave and clever, and she's brave in a way where it's not that she ignores the dangerous situations. Like she recognizes them and she is scared and she acts anyway. And I feel like that is so important to show that bravery doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means that you do the right thing in spite of that. And I think that Binti is a great example of that. I also really love that throughout the trilogy, Binti's success is not dependent on her cutting ties with her community or her culture. She definitely has to kind of work to bridge these 2 worlds or these 2 parts of herself, but her success is never based on her learning that, oh, she was wrong to want to carry on some of these traditions that her family and her community have. And I feel like that is unfortunately a very rare thing to see, so I really loved seeing that in this series. Next, I have the Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste, and this is a middle grade fantasy with a little bit of horror story. I believe it's the first in a trilogy, although I have only read the first one, and it's rooted in Caribbean folklore. And that was one of my favorite things about this book, is seeing that folklore so deeply woven into this story. And it's very interesting because our main character, Corinne, she doesn't believe in the Jumbies, these like supernatural creatures that a lot of other people in her town do. Like she doesn't believe they're real. And then she starts realizing that her father is acting strange, and she thinks that he is actually starting to come into the power of one of these Jumbies, one of these creatures. And so Corinne has to team up with some of her friends to try and take down the supernatural enemy. And like I said, I really enjoyed the folklore in this book, the world building, and just the way that all of that felt so present in the plot of this book. And even though folklore and fairy tales and that kind of thing are definitely very popular influences for books, I still don't think we see enough that are based in Caribbean folklore. So this is a good one to check out for that. Next, I have the March series by John Lewis, Andrew Aydin, and Nate Powell. This is a very interesting combination of genres because it is a nonfiction graphic novel, kind of a memoir as well. John Lewis is the main writer of this series. This is another series where I really want to continue the series soon. I have only read the first volume, but it was fantastic, and this is another one I think probably a lot of people have heard of. It is about Congressman John Lewis's fight for civil rights and just his activism at that period. And this was just such a fantastic graphic novel. I really enjoyed the style of the illustrations. I really loved the detail. I also really liked the frame story and the way that was handled. The majority of this volume is, I guess, kind of a flashback, so you actually see what John Lewis was doing during the civil rights movement. But there is a little bit of a frame story, and I really enjoyed how that was used. Something else I thought was very interesting was we actually saw some of the training that these protesters had to go through in order to prepare themselves to go up against these really hateful and racist people. I don't think that's something that gets a lot of focus when we talk about the civil rights movement. Next, I want to talk about Slay by Brittany Morris, and this book I think just came out last year. And it really, really went under the radar, and it shouldn't have. This is a fantastic book, and I feel like it's one that a lot of people would really enjoy and get a lot out of. We follow our main character, Kira. This is a contemporary book, by the way, and she's one of the programmers or game designers for this game called Slay, which is based on African folklore and also on African American culture, and it's specifically for Black players to have a safe space in the gaming community. And nobody in Kira's life knows that she's involved with this game at all, much less that she is one of the creators of this game. She doesn't feel like she can really tell people that, and then something happens where a boy is actually killed because of something related to the game. Suddenly the game Slay is in the news, everybody's talking about it, and there starts to be these discussions about, like, is it racist if it's just for Black people and all of this. And then on top of this, people start sending threats to Kira about suing her for her, like, discriminatory game and all of this. And so Kira's trying to figure out how she can protect her identity and protect the game and keep this safe space that all of these players have come to depend on. And this was just such a fantastic book. For one thing, it's so rare and such a wonderful thing to see a young Black girl involved in STEM, that she's a computer programmer or gamer or anything. And the plot of this book was just really fantastic. It was very compelling to read, and something I wasn't really expecting is you actually get multiple points of view. Kira is definitely the main character, but you get multiple points of view from people who are also players of the game, and so you see how important this game is to people. I think that was such a great highlight of the book, and I also really loved the actual scenes that took place in the video game. Generally, like, video games is not really a buzzword for me, or like virtual reality or anything. Like, I've never been interested in Ready Player One and that kind of thing. But the way those scenes were described in this book, Brittany Morris is such a good writer that she made them very easy to picture and really enjoyable to read, so I'm very impressed with that. And she's just a fantastic writer overall. Like, she's so good at characterization and character relationships. Like, some of the family relationships or friendships that Kira has were just so complex and so layered, and I loved the way those were explored. There's also a lot that this book deals with regarding racism and online bullying and microaggressions, especially. Like, there are some characters in this book who are just so insufferable and so frustrating to read about because they genuinely think that they are doing the right thing and they're just so clearly not. But I think those are really important conversations to have. So just all around, Brittany Morris is a very, very talented author. I can't wait to see what she writes next. I would definitely recommend Slay. Next, I have another one of the books on this list that is definitely very well known, and that is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. So this is a science fiction story where the sci-fi elements are not really the point, which is one of the things I tend to really enjoy reading. We follow our main character, who is a Black woman named Dana, and I think she's living in modern day at the time this book was written, which would have been, I think, late 70s, early 80s. And one day she just suddenly finds herself transported back in time to the antebellum South. She doesn't know why or how this happened, but she's there. And she ends up saving the life of a young white boy. She does end up getting back to her own time, but after that, this keeps happening. Like, with no warning, she will suddenly be transported back in time yet again. And so the rest of the book is about her trying to figure out why that is happening, because it seems like whenever she gets transported back in time, it's related to this young white boy and trying to protect him or save him, or like he's in danger in some way. So Dana is trying to figure out why that is happening, what's going on, and this is just such a fantastic book, and I can't really say anything about this book that hasn't been said 1,000 times more and better, but this is just so complex and so layered. I just love the way this book explores personal responsibility and doing the right thing and not really being sure what that is all the time. This can definitely be a very intense and stressful book to read at times, definitely very upsetting, because obviously Dana is a Black woman in the antebellum South for most of this book. The story is just so compelling, the characters are so complex, and the relationships are just so messy, and the way that those relationships interact with the themes of this book is just so well done, and I can't recommend this book highly enough, although probably most people, if not everyone, has heard of it already. Next, I have anything that has been illustrated or written by Vashti Harrison, and specifically the one I'm going to talk about right now is Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History, which is written and illustrated by Vashti Harrison. I have another book that she illustrated that I'm going to talk about in a minute. This is a book about amazing Black women from history, and the things that they did, the things that they accomplished, and from all different time periods too. And another thing I love about this book is something I always appreciate in these kinds of compilation books, where they talk about some of the really famous ones, you know, like Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks and people like that. But this book also covers a lot of Black women who we don't talk about nearly enough, sometimes at all. So I feel like it was a great balance of that, and this is definitely a book intended for a younger audience, but I read it as an adult and I still got so much out of it. I absolutely loved it. I love Vashti Harrison's illustration style, and I think even though the write-ups are pretty short, I think you definitely get enough to get a picture of who these women were and what they accomplished, and also to pique your curiosity if you want to learn more about them, but highly recommend. And then the other book that Vashti Harrison illustrated that I have read is Solway, which is written by Lupita Nyong'o. I actually just read this one at the beginning of June. And this is just an absolutely gorgeous picture book. I actually have a physical copy on the way to me right now because I read this digitally from my library and I just loved it. So this is a picture book about a young girl named Solway, and she has dark skin, darker than anybody in her family, and she doesn't feel like she's beautiful because of colorism and racism and all of these horrible ideas that she has grown up being surrounded by because of the world that we live in. So she doesn't think that she's beautiful, and then one night she has this experience with the night sky that involves kind of a story or a legend, and that makes Solway realize that she is beautiful. And because this is such a short picture book, I don't want to say too much, but this is just absolutely stunning. The story is beautiful, the illustrations are beautiful, just everything about this book is just so powerful and so important and so lovely, and I can't recommend it enough. Next, I have The Bells by Danielle Clayton. This is the first book in a fantasy series with a setting that is inspired by historical New Orleans, and this is just such a powerful look at beauty standards and our culture's obsession with beauty and the horrible things that can lead to. So our main character, Camellia, is a belle, and in this world, everybody except the belles are born colorless, and the only people who are born with color are belles, and they are the only ones who can give color to other people, because if you're not a belle, you're born, I think, like gray and kind of ashen, and your hair, like your skin, like nothing has any color, except I think their eyes are red, and the only people who can like fix that are the belles, and Camellia is one of the belles who are competing to become the palace favorite, which means that they will kind of be the personal belles of the royal family. And at first it doesn't look like she's going to get that, but then something happens where she does end up going to the palace, and she gets drawn into this web of politics and deception and danger. And throughout the book we see Camellia starting to learn that maybe this obsession with beauty, which she has grown up, believing that this is her gift, that this is an important thing, that she can like save people by making them beautiful. She starts to realize that maybe this fixation on beauty is not actually a good thing. And I just really loved this book. I loved the way that the setting was described because it is this very rich and opulent, and like very extravagant kind of setting, but it wasn't overwhelming in the amount of detail that you got. Like I didn't feel like I was just slogging through like descriptions of settings and everything, which is something I tend not to like in books. But I think also throughout the book you have this underlying darkness to it that comes through really well. So I loved the writing, I loved the world. I also really liked Camellia as a main character, and I also really loved the themes in this book. One of the criticisms that I remember seeing in reviews is that people feel like this book didn't go far enough as a commentary on beauty and the beauty industry and our like culture of being obsessed with beauty. And I actually disagree. I actually think this book did a really good job of showing how somebody who has grown up right in the middle of this culture and this obsession, like I said, Camellia has grown up her whole life like believing that she has been blessed with this gift in order to save people. Like she thinks she's doing something good. And so I think when somebody has that background, it makes sense to me that they wouldn't just instantly realize and start to put the pieces together about what is really going on here and how these things could actually be bad. So I just wanted to mention that because that is something I have heard a lot. I didn't feel like that was a problem with this book. I really, really enjoyed this one. Next, I have two books by Jason Reynolds. The first one is, I think, probably his most famous, and that is Long Way Down. This is a novel in verse that is set over the course of only 60 seconds. And we follow a main character named Will, and his brother has just been shot and killed. So the entirety of this book takes place on the elevator ride where Will takes a gun, gets in the elevator, and he has decided that he is going to go and kill the person who killed his brother to get revenge. And every floor that the elevator stops on, a new person gets onto the elevator, and that person is always somebody in Will's life who has been connected in some way to gun violence. And this is just such a powerful book. I read this in print, but I have also heard that the audiobook is amazing. I believe Jason Reynolds actually narrates his own audiobook, and I've just heard amazing things about that. But even reading this physically, this is just such a brilliant book. Something I really loved about it is, like, this is a novel in verse. I can't remember if I mentioned that. And the way that Jason Reynolds plays with formatting and plays with rhythm is just amazing. And I also think he did an amazing job with the characterization, because I think it would have been very easy for an author telling the story to have the people who get onto the elevator feel more like ideas like representations of a certain perspective about violence or about gun violence in particular. And even though all of these characters did have a particular point of view, they still were so fleshed out, and you felt like you knew them so well, despite the fact that you had so little time with them. And I was just so impressed with that. Like, the themes and the way that this book explores those themes is just absolutely incredible. And then the other Jason Reynolds book I have is The Boy in the Black Suit. This one I just read at the end of May, and I think I'm probably going to do a full review on this book because I just fell in love with it and I have a lot of things to say. But our main character is a boy named Matt, and his mother has recently died, and he's really grief-stricken. His father is not really handling it very well. He's starting to slide back into alcoholism, and so Matt is trying to deal with his own grief on top of worrying about his dad. And Matt also needs a job, and because of a series of circumstances, he ends up working at a funeral home, and so that's why he's the boy in the black suit, because he wears a black suit to school every day because he goes right to work after school. And after he starts working there, Matt realizes that there's something about working at this funeral home and being a part of these funerals and these services that is very cathartic for him. It makes him feel seen because he's watching other people experience the same grief and pain that he is going through. Like, to know that other people are not okay makes him feel a little more okay. And then he also meets this girl named Lovey, and they start spending time together too. This is just such a wonderful book. I think this is one of those contemporaries that perfectly balances the really serious themes with the more lighthearted and fun moments. Because even though this is a book about grief, it's also about friendship, and there's also a girl named Lovey who Matt starts spending time with and who he has a crush on. So there's that kind of lighter element. But all of these characters are dealing with serious things too. And those are just some of my favorite contemporaries to read, where there is that very serious element, but also that element of hope and lightheartedness. And I just think those things were beautifully balanced in this book. I really loved Matt as a main character. I loved all of our characters, actually. Like, I really loved his friend Chris. I really loved Lovey. She was so wonderful and so strong and interesting, and she also had things in her past, and those things were very important to her. But like with Matt's story, they didn't define her as a character. This was my favorite book that I read in May, so definitely highly recommend this one. I don't feel like this one gets as much attention as Long Way Down. Next, I have The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin is, of course, a very well-known fantasy author, but I don't feel like this series gets quite as much attention, and I absolutely loved this first book. I own the second one, so I hope to read that very soon. And we follow our main character, Yena, and right at the beginning of the book, after her mother has died, she is summoned by her grandfather to his kingdom, and she gets there, and Yena has never had any interest in visiting him or like his kingdom or anything, but she shows up, she gets there, and her grandfather is basically like, congratulations, you're going to be competing for the opportunity to win the throne, and if you don't win, you're going to die. And because of political reasons and reasons for her own safety, Yena realizes that she doesn't really have a choice. She's gonna have to stick around and compete for the throne, whether she likes it or not. And so this book is about her adjusting to this world of politics and trickery and a completely different culture than what she has grown up in. And this is just such a masterful book. I loved Yena as a main character. She is so strong and she's so fiercely committed to doing the right thing. And even though she is a little inexperienced in certain things related to this kingdom or this like competition to get the throne, she's still such a resourceful and smart character. Like, she never makes like the really stupid mistakes that are clearly there just to advance the plot. She's just such a wonderful character to follow, and just the characters in general are so complex and so layered. Because another thing about this book is the setting is just so intricate and richly described and wonderful, and a lot of the backstory of this world has to do with the gods of these kingdoms, and the way that there was actually a war between gods, and some of them lost, and so they end up being captured and like forced into servitude by some of the humans. And we actually see like several characters who are the gods in this book, and they are just so interesting and so complex. This is another one where it's kind of hard to explain what the story is about. Also, just the way that N.K. Jemisin writes, I just really loved. I really click with her style because, again, it's like the perfect amount of description, and it's got a little bit of a lyrical quality to it, but not in a way that feels like it's just drowning you in like figurative language and poetry and all of this. It has like just the right amount, and she can definitely paint the picture of a scene beautifully. But she's also really great at character dynamics and like characterization and like dialogue and everything. Like, just as a writer, her craft is just amazing, which again, everybody knows. Like, everybody knows how amazing N.K. Jemisin is. But just in case you haven't really heard about this particular series or you weren't sure about wanting to try it, I just absolutely loved this book. And the last book I'm going to talk about today is Once Upon an Eid, Stories of Hope and Joy by 15 Muslim Voices, edited by S.K. Ali and Aisha Saeed. So this book contains writers and characters from a wide variety of Muslim backgrounds, and several of those are from Black Muslims, which is not something that we see a lot of stories about. And I also want to mention, like, for this one, I am not Muslim myself, so that is another area of representation that I can't personally speak to. All of these stories are our own voices, and as with the other books I've talked about, from reviews that I have seen, the representation is done very well. But again, just keep that in mind. But the specific stories and writers I want to mention are Perfect and Eat Pictures. Those are two stories by Ijeawele Tompkins Bigelow. I'm only going to give very brief descriptions because, again, these are short stories. But Perfect, we follow a main character who is, her background is from the Mandinka. And that story is a lot about cultural differences and similarities, and how her and her family are handling those. And then Eat Pictures is actually a short story in verse that was just so beautifully written, and that one is about generations of family and traditions being handed down, and about generational trauma and the way that you can remember that but also celebrate. Then Just Like Chest Armor is a story by Candace Montgomery, and that is about a young girl who is very, very excited to be wearing hijab for the first time. She's been pestering her mother to let her try it, and that's what the story is about, is her being so excited about it and finally getting the opportunity to wear hijab for the first time. And then Creative Fixes by Ashley Franklin. That one is about a young girl who has actually converted to Islam. Her whole family has, and just the adjustment period and her struggling with feeling like she doesn't quite fit in yet, and just the changes that come with that. So I believe those are all of the stories in this collection that are by Black authors, and I just highly recommend this collection overall. I did specifically want to highlight the stories that are by Black authors. Okay, everybody, so those were my spotlight recommendations for some books by Black authors that I absolutely love, that I highly recommend. Again, I encourage you to seek out Own Voices reviews, and again, I ask you to please check out the resources in the description box about how you can donate or sign petitions or get involved or support the Black Lives Matter movement, not just now in times of crisis, but always and going forward. And the same thing goes for reading books by Black authors. This should not be like a one-time thing or like a only when something happens. We should be doing this year-round.